March 2nd, 2026. A Monday evening in Cleveland, Ohio. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon over the South Collinwood neighborhood, casting long, gray shadows across East 162nd Street for one local resident. It was just the end of another day, a routine walk with his dog near the Ginn Academy playground. But dogs don't care about routine. They care about sense. And as they approached the chain-link fence near Midland Avenue, his dog didn't just stop. It fixated. It bolted toward a patch of disturbed earth, sniffing with a frantic, desperate energy that every dog owner recognizes as something different. Half buried in the cold Ohio mud was a suitcase. It looked discarded like common trash. But when the man reached down to clear the dirt, when he unzipped that weather-beaten fabric, the reality of what he saw would become the lead story on every news station in the country by morning. He didn't find clothes. He found a face. The man would later tell police, "I've been walking past it for about a week. My dog kept stopping. I finally pulled it up, unzipped it, and I saw a head." But as the first sirens began to wail in the distance, no one, not the dog walker, not the first responding officers, realized that this suitcase was only the beginning. Just 25 feet away, a second shallow grave was waiting to be found. And inside, a second suitcase, a second tragedy. This is the deep dive investigation into the lives and deaths of Mila Chatman and Amor Wilson, and the mother, Aliyah Henderson, who stood at the center of a 5-year secret. By 6:15 p.m., East 162nd Street was no longer a quiet residential block. It was a fortress. Cleveland Police Chief Dorothy Todd stood before a sea of blue lights, her face etched with a grim professional resolve. Detectives from a homicide unit didn't just secure the area. They began what's known as a grid search. In a case like this, every inch of soil is a potential witness. They weren't just looking for bodies. They were looking for a timeline. How long had these suitcases been here? Were they dropped recently? Or had the neighborhood been walking past a graveyard for months? Chief Todd would tell the press, "It was some time. It's not just something that was recent. This detail is crucial. In the world of true crime forensics, some time is a terrifying phrase. It suggests that while children played on the nearby Ginn Academy playground, while neighbors mowed their lawns and went to work, 2 young girls were lying in the dirt just feet away. But as a medical examiner took custody of the remains, a massive problem emerged. There were no missing persons reports in Cleveland that matched these girls. No one had called 911 to say they were gone. For all intents and purposes, these 2 children didn't exist in the eyes of the law. They were ghosts, and ghosts are notoriously hard to identify. While the police were staring at unidentified remains, a man named DeShaun Chapman was staring at a photo of a 3-year-old girl in a pink dress. DeShaun was a restaurant cook, a hard-working man who had spent the last 5 years of his life in a state of purgatory. He was the father of Mila Chatman, and since 2020, his life had been defined by a single agonizing goal: finding his daughter. DeShaun and Aliyah Henderson were never married, but they lived together for about a year after Mila was born. He describes Mila as a kid's kid. She loved the color pink. She swore to everyone who would listen that she was a real-life princess. But in 2020, Aliyah took the girls and vanished. DeShaun didn't just sit back. For 1,800 days, he fought the system. He filed for emergency custody. He contacted child welfare agencies. He tried to track down Aliyah's phone numbers, but every time he got close, the line was disconnected. Aliyah was a digital ghost, moving through the shadows of the city, keeping the girls out of school, off the grid, and away from their fathers. On the evening of March 4th, DeShaun's phone finally rang. It wasn't the call he had prayed for. It was the Cleveland police. They told him they had used rapid DNA relationship testing, a high-tech forensic tool that can establish biological links in hours rather than weeks. The DNA confirmed his worst nightmare. The girl in the first suitcase was 8-year-old Mila. The girl in the second suitcase was her 10-year-old half-sister, Amor Wilson. DeShaun's reaction was raw, the kind of pain that sticks to you. He told reporters, "I felt useless. I couldn't save my baby. And the worst part? It turns out she was living within view of where their bodies were found." Think about that for a second. While DeShaun was searching the city, while he was filing court papers, Mila was living just blocks away. She was right there, and yet she was miles out of reach. But as the grief turned to rage, the investigation took a turn that no one expected. When police finally tracked Aliyah Henderson to a well-kept home on East 162nd Street, they didn't just find a suspect. They found a third child, and that child was smiling. How do you find a woman who has spent 5 years perfecting the art of being invisible? Aliyah Henderson wasn't just hiding. She was erasing herself. She didn't have a steady job on the books. She didn't have a registered vehicle in her name. And most importantly, she kept Mila and Amor out of the one place the state is guaranteed to look: the public school system, by claiming she was homeschooling, a system that in many states lacks rigorous over-the-shoulder check-ins. Aliyah managed to keep the girls in a blind spot for half a decade. But in 2026, you can't live without leaving a digital footprint. The investigation shifted from the muddy field in South Collinwood to the high-tech crimes unit. Detectives began tracing the digital echoes of Aliyah's relatives. They looked for IP addresses that log into specific social media accounts from the South Collinwood area. They found a single recurring ping coming from a router on East 162nd Street. When they cross-referenced this IP with utility records, they found the house wasn't Aliyah's name. It belonged to a family member, but the data didn't lie. Someone was using that Wi-Fi to search for news updates about the Suitcase discovery. The predator was watching the news, unaware that the news was looking right back at her. On the morning of March 4th, the SWAT team didn't find a crack house or a den of squalor. They found a well-maintained, ordinary Cleveland home. There were flowers on the porch. The lawn was trimmed. But when they breached the door, the air changed. Inside, they found Aliyah Henderson. She didn't run. She didn't scream. According to witnesses, she was eerily calm, almost as if she'd been expecting them for 5 years. But the real shock came when officers cleared the back bedroom. They found a third child, a young boy. He was healthy. He was fed. He had toys and a warm bed. This is a psychological black hole of the case that will be debated in court for years. How does a mother choose which children live in a suitcase and which child lives in a bedroom? Why was this boy spared while Mila and Amor were discarded like unwanted luggage? Neighbors were stunned. They knew Aliyah. They had seen her with the boy, but they had never seen Mila or Amor. For 5 years, those two girls had been kept in a state of domestic imprisonment, hidden behind closed curtains, while their mother played house with a third child just rooms away. When detectives brought 28-year-old Aliyah Henderson into the interrogation room, they weren't looking for a confession. Thanks to the Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner and rapid DNA testing, they already had the science. They wanted the why. But some suspects don't give you the satisfaction of an answer. On Thursday afternoon, Police Chief Dorothy Todd and her team formally charged Aliyah Henderson with 2 counts of aggravated murder and child endangerment. The child endangerment charge stems from the environment the surviving third child was kept in, while the aggravated murder charges carry the ultimate weight of the Ohio justice system. The speed of this arrest was staggering. Less than 48 hours after a dog walker unzipped a muddy suitcase near Ginn Academy, the mother of the children inside was behind bars. But the speed of the arrest only highlights the agonizing slowness of the 5 years prior. On Friday, March 6th at 8:30 in the morning, Aliyah faced a judge in Cleveland Municipal Court. The contrast in that courtroom was impossible to ignore. Here was a woman standing in the center of the justice system, a system that her ex-partner, DeShaun Chapman, had begged to intervene for 1,800 days. Now, the system had finally caught up to her, but was 5 years too late. The most terrifying aspect of Aliyah's defense strategy so far isn't what is being said, but what isn't. The bodies were not dismembered. They were placed in shallow graves, just 25 feet apart, left to the elements. What goes through a mother's mind as she walks out a field? leaving 2 suitcases behind, and returns home to cook dinner for a 3rd child. We often talk about the monsters in the dark, the strangers waiting in the alleyway, but the tragedy of the Collinwood suitcase case is that the monster held the keys to the front door, but the blame doesn't stop at the doorstep of East 162nd Street. This case exposes a massive, gaping hole in our social safety nets. DeShaun Chapman, a restaurant cook who worked honest hours, tried to do everything right. He filed for emergency custody. He contacted child welfare agencies. But time and time again, he was told that without a physical address for Aliyah, their hands were tied. How does society allow 2 children, 10-year-old Amor and 8-year-old Mila, to simply vanish from public record? How does homeschooling become a shield for domestic imprisonment? These are the questions the Ohio legislature will have to answer in the coming months. Today at 4 p.m., the community of South Collinwood will gather for a candlelight vigil. They aren't just mourning 2 bodies found in a field. They are mourning the futures that were stolen. Amor Wilson was 10 years old. She was just beginning to figure out who she was. Mila Chatman was 8. Her father remembers her as a kid's kid who was always smiling. Her favorite color was pink. She swore to her dad that she was a real-life princess. Instead of a castle, her mother gave her a suitcase. The trial of Aliyah Henderson will undoubtedly become one of the most closely watched legal battles in Ohio's history. But as the media circus descends on Cleveland, we must not let Mila and Amor become just another true crime statistic. At what point does an adult's right to privacy override a child's right to protection? Where do we draw the line? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think the child welfare system should be held criminally negligent when a parent repeatedly begs for help to no avail? I read every single comment, and I will highlight the best arguments in our next case update. If you believe Mila and Amor deserve better, hit the like button. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the forensic updates from a medical examiner, which will ultimately decide if Aliyah Henderson faces a death penalty. Stay vigilant, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next deep dive.